I sadly didn't know all that much about Marshawn Kneeland, in part because, unfortunately, I'm just a fan, and he hadn't done all that much yet for my Dallas Cowboys. He was a second-round pick out of Western Michigan. As a rookie a year ago, he played 36% of the snaps. As a second-year player this year, through 7 games, he played 35% of the snaps. He wound up, for his very brief career in Dallas, with 1 sack, 5 tackles for loss, 4 quarterback hits, 1 pass deflection, and as most of you hardcore fans know, he did finally score a touchdown off a blocked punt upon which he fell in the end zone in the final game that he played 2 weeks ago, Monday night, for our Dallas Cowboys. But I'd like to thank ESPN for its pregame coverage this past Monday night of Marshawn Kneeland and his passing by paying tribute to the young man that he was off the football field. I want to thank ESPN for letting me just a little bit get to know the young man that he was so powerfully off the football field. By all accounts, and as I got to see the footage of him doing an interview at his draft combine, he was something. He was a force. He was as hard a worker as they said there was on the football team, as dedicated to playing football as any player was on this football team. A classic overachiever who cared maybe almost too much about succeeding in the National Football League, coming out of a small school, Western Michigan, to where he originally went as not a highly recruited player, a late bloomer in college who caught the Cowboys' eyes and was drafted ultimately in the 2nd round. I'll get to that in just a moment. But the quotes from several of his teammates and several of his coaches, both the head coach and assistant coaches who got to know him, brought tears to my eyes because, as Brian Schottenheimer said, the head coach, that Marshawn Kneeland had a smile that could buckle your knees. I was amazed at how profoundly his passing impacted this football team. I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen other tragedies happen to many other football teams during football seasons. And depending on the connection that player had with the locker room, with his teammates, some teams were stopped cold and drained of their energy by a passing and a tragedy, while other teams, if there was not much connection to the player, paid fairly brief tribute and just moved on. This team got brought to its knees by the passing of Marshawn Kneeland. This team was shaken to its core by this passing. It was so shaken as it grieved, candlelight tribute, breakfast for the players, went so far as the PR director telling ESPN that he actually wished they hadn't had the bye week because they actually, as a team, needed something to do to help them get through this, like try to get their minds back on something else, not to diminish the grieving, but to just give them some other outlet, because they had no outlet immediately after his tragic, shocking passing. So I wondered about how this team would respond this past Monday night at Las Vegas, because would it use this tragedy as inspiration, or would it be so drained by it that it just wouldn't have the heart yet for getting back out and playing the game of football? And it did use this passing as inspiration. They all wore their pregame shirts with Marshon's face on the front, handsome face. He was a dynamo in the locker room, touched a lot of hearts. And they wore their decals on their helmets. They dedicated this game to this young man, and they're dedicating the rest of this season to this young man. And it touched me to see the emotion with which they played, because they hadn't played this way all year. And I don't want to overstate it, because these things are impossible to gauge, to sort of quantify. Well, it had how much impact on the... I don't know, because nobody could quantify. I just know what my eye test told me during this game. This was different. This team played a different brand of football. As Dak said after the game, that you can scoff at this if you like, say it's just talk, but I don't think it's talk from a Dak Prescott who obviously lost a brother to suicide. He said, I know Marshon was looking down on us, and we wanted to make him proud. That's the way this team played. Dak went on to say, we were playing with the style that he played with intensity, with the effort, and the finish. He said, we're going to continue to shine a light on Marshon and carry on his legacy. We need to play like this week after week. And he wore on his wrist tape, did Dak Prescott, the favorite saying of Marshawn Kneeland, which was one love. This team really loved this player. Again, a player that I barely knew, because he hadn't yet been able to assert himself on the football field. But this team was severely impacted by this in ways that other teams I've covered were not impacted by a loss of a teammate. That's significant to me. And after I watched the pregame tributes on ESPN, and after I watched the way this team played, and after I watched and heard all the postgame outpouring of emotion for Marshawn Kneeland, it made me think what I often think when people pass, but especially in this case, if only this young man could have seen this, would it have stopped him, or at least given him pause in taking his own life? Again, suicide is impossible to dissect and discuss, because I don't know anybody in his family. Who knows, maybe even his girlfriend, his pregnant girlfriend, couldn't really tell you what demons got a hold of him that night, that fateful night. It's just impossible to know. But it did give me pause to think, gee, if only he could have seen this, maybe it could have saved him if he'd known what he meant to this team. Even if he hadn't contributed that much as a football player, he was contributing mightily by touching so many lives in the locker room. And I don't think it was any phony baloney about the lives that he was I don't think this was just after the tragedy, politically correct, blah, blah, blah. I don't think there was any blah, blah, blah. Your BS detector is on in these moments, and when it rings hollow, you detect it. I didn't detect any here, any hollow. This was legit from the soul, mourning and grieving and gushing about what Marshawn Kneeland meant to this football team. So I slept on it. I got to thinking about all I've been through with this franchise. It gave me pause, made me wonder. And I'll just walk you quickly back through a bit of history here that now touches on Marshawn Kneeland. I went through so much with this team. If you've seen the documentary on Netflix, you know that I wrote 3 books about the Dallas Cowboys. The first was about the rise and fall of Thomas Wade Landry, one of the greatest coaches ever. The second book was about Jerry versus Jimmy, as you saw in the documentary, called The Boys. The last book was about Barry Switzer versus Troy Aikman, called Hellbent. But let's go back to that first book, of which I am the most proud, because it had scope and expanse to it. It covered a lot of years from 1960 to 1989, when Jerry Jones bought the Dallas Cowboys out from under Tom Landry, replaced Tom Landry with Jimmy Johnson. But a big point of God's coach was that Gil Brandt, the personnel director, the draft master of the Cowboys, he made Tom Landry with his draft picks of the 60s and 70s, and then Gil Brandt broke Tom Landry with his draft picks of the 1980s. One swing and miss after another, after another, after another. Both first and second round picks, but especially first round picks, especially. So I got to know just about all these guys. And many of them were overdrafted. It was not their fault that they were failing in Dallas. It was Gil Brandt's fault, because he had gained such a national reputation as the draft master, the guru. And it was because nobody else was spending much money on draft research. Most of the teams through the 60s and into the early 70s were drafting out of Street and Smith football magazine. They were just reading what you and I could read about the college kids and then say, oh, well, he was really good at Ohio State. He was really good at Southern Cal. Let's take him. Gil Brandt's saying, no, I got to know the assistant equipment managers and all the secretaries and admins and all the offices of all these college football teams, all these programs. I know where the diamonds in the rough are, the Hollywood Hendersons, a little Langston College in the middle of nowhere in my state, my home state of Oklahoma. And he scored and he scored and he scored. And the Cowboys scored on the football field. And Tom Landry was a great football coach, but he had the players. And suddenly, starting through the 80s, he did not have the players as Gil reached farther and farther for diamonds in the rough that weren't there. So we went through a series of, and I'm going to get to the specifics here, of a Larry Bethea and a Rod Hill, Howard Richards, Billy Cannon Jr., Kevin Brooks, Danny Noonan. Did I have legendary battles with Danny Noonan? All before it swung back around, and they went 3 straight drafts then, as you well know. See the Netflix documentary, The Gambler and His Cowboys. 3 straight drafts of Michael Irvin first round, Troy Aikman first round, Emmitt Smith first round. Boom, boom, boom. Super Bowls, plural. Even back before the Larry Bethea draft, 1978, he went to the bottom of the first round, 28th overall. But even back to that draft, the draft before was Gil Brandt stole Tony Dorsett from the Seattle Seahawks. I'm still not sure how he pulled it off, but he pulled it off. Did Tony Dorsett ever pull off some 99-yard runs on Monday Night Football? Was he ever a great back? But that was the last of Gil Brandt. Larry Bethea was next, a defensive tackle out of Michigan State. 28th overall, 1978. The heir apparent to Ed Too Tall Jones and Harvey Martin, 6 foot 5 inch, 250 pound Larry Bethea out of Hampton, Virginia. Never forget, 1981 season NFC Championship game, one of the most famous ever, if not the most famous ever. The catch game, the Dwight Clark game at Candlestick in San Francisco. Cowboys at Niners for all the marbles. Cincinnati wasn't all that good in the AFC. Somebody was going to win a Super Bowl. Push the elevator button to get on. Ding. Going down in the team hotel that Sunday. Happened to get on the elevator with Larry Bethea. I knew him a little bit, enough to say hello, didn't know him all that well. But he was going to have to start that game that day in place of the great John Dutton, who was hurt. And I said, "How you feeling?" He said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, good luck today, ma'am." And he said, "I'm going to need it." I think Larry Bethea knew he was overdrafted, in over his head. He just never was able to live up. And he didn't last long in Dallas. First of Gil Brandt's many draft busts. And he had a horrible end to his life, suffered from depression. I won't go into the gory details because they're just too gory. Very opposite of what happened to Marshawn Kneeland, but it just degenerated into unmentionables. And finally, on April 23rd of 1987, Larry Bethea took his own life. Talked to several of his teammates after that, and they said he just knew he couldn't live up, and he couldn't take the shame of failing for America's team in Dallas, Texas. It's hard, man, but it wasn't his fault. He just wasn't worth a first-round pick. If Larry Bethea had been drafted in the third round, I think he would have been just fine. Expectations would have been much lower. And then came Rod Hill, a defensive back out of Kentucky State. Started at Iowa, but he was a talented kid, man. My friend Gary Gibbs, who wound up being the head coach at the University of Oklahoma, went to his first minicamp practice and called me raving about Rod Hill's ability. He said he just watched him in the drills, and he was just so much better than any other DB on the field. But Rod Hill, as talented and gifted as he was, he just wasn't ready for the bright lights. And the Cowboys had a core of defensive backs called Thurman's Thieves, led by Dennis Thurman, who was a late-round draft pick out of USC, and Everson Walls, undrafted from Dallas, Texas, out of Grambling. They just knew how to play football, and were they ever great at what they did? Everson Walls, one of the great ball hawks I've ever been around before. And Rod Hill just couldn't fit in. He was ostracized by the group because he was the one getting all the money, not them. 25th overall. And he just couldn't make the plays when it was time to make them on the football field. So he was a cast-off from that group of Thurman's Thieves. And one day at camp, I wanted to do a column with him. I wanted to sit down with him and talk to him about it. And I look over in the lunchroom where the team was eating, and he was sitting away from the group of defensive backs. He was 6 or 7 seats down on a long table by himself. And it touched me. And I thought, I'm going to just go try. I went over, introduced myself, said, "Can we talk?" And he said, "No, man, I don't want to talk." And Everson Walls, who I knew very well, overheard this from 6 seats down, got up, marched over, and said, "Rod Hill, you're going to talk to Mr. Bayless." You need to own this. Whatever you are or aren't as a football player, you need to talk about it to this man, because he deserves for you to talk about it, because the fans deserve to know how you feel about failing so far as a Dallas Cowboy. It was rough, tough talk. It was honest to a fault kind of talk that shook me and shook Rod Hill, who immediately said, "Sit down," to me. And he poured his heart out. And he didn't last long in Dallas. The next of Gill's draft bus. Wound up in Buffalo, then Detroit. Was Raider during that scab season, that strike season. Wound up playing for Winnipeg in the CFL, Canadian Football League. And he won 2 Grey Cup championships and became their all-time interception leader. I think he had 5 in one game, and made a life for himself in Winnipeg. Was a banker for a while, ran a Walmart for a while in Winnipeg. Good for him. He saved himself after the shame that he felt failing in Dallas as a first-round pick. Then all the rest of these guys, they're all overdrafted. It wasn't their fault. It wasn't so much what they didn't do or they didn't try hard. They were all trying too hard to live up to being taken way too high by Gil Brandt. And then all the second-round choices, they were just as bad. Doug Donnelly, White Lightning, they called him. Jeff Rohr, Mike Walter, Victor Scott, Jesse Penn, Daryl Clack, I can't even remember him, as a running back. Ron Francis. It was just one after another, first and second round, swing and miss, swing and miss, swing and miss. And I hurt for all of them because I kept hearing stories about many of them having depression issues post-Dallas. It's hard being a Cowboy, man, especially when you weren't living up. And remember, there was no internet. So now I look back at Marshawn Kneeland's life and I say, look what he went through. So, as I said, he went to Western Michigan, which was about 50 miles south of where he grew up in Grand Rapids. And late bloomer, because he only made second team All-MAC as a senior. So he stayed all 4 years and as a senior, second team All-MAC. And I read lots of draft reports about him because I didn't watch him play. A little stiff, not all that twitchy as an athlete, mostly a bull rusher, hard worker, hard player, high motor. He could set the edge against the run, but not so much of a sack artist. Not that bendable, not that explosive coming off the edge. And I expressed this in my tweets the day he was taken in the second round. I hope he can live up. Because if you only make second team All-MAC and you're a second round pick of the Dallas Cowboys, does that bode well enough? Then I heard about his mother had passed. His mom passed before the combine. And obviously before the draft. And as I saw on ESPN this past Monday night, deeply impacted by that loss. It's possible he never quite got over that loss. Especially when you come to Dallas in the age of the internet. And most of these kids, as you know, live on the internet. And they have a hard time living with the internet. Because it is evil out there, especially if you get drafted by America's team. I have no idea if that impacted him at all as he began to struggle a bit. There's still time for him to find himself, but he was an instant impact, as we've seen from some first and second round choices who just immediately click, take hold. So he signs in Dallas, and, I'm sure a lot of people say, well, he got pretty good money. He got second-round money. It was okay. $6.83 million over 4 years. $4 million of that guaranteed. It's pretty good. A lot more than a lot of us would make. Signing bonus of 1.8 in 2025. This season he was making 1.1. You say, well, how with that kind of money, how could you even think about taking it? Well, it's suicide, man. Who knows what was going on behind closed doors in his private and personal life? I don't know. But it did make me wonder if struggling to break in to the defensive line rotation for, at that point, a pretty bad defense, if that was eating at him as an overachiever and a young man supremely dedicated to making it in Dallas. They showed video of his extended family and friends at their draft celebration the night he was picked, the day he was picked. It'd be second round in Grand Rapids. And it was a throng of people, and they went crazy for Marshawn Kneeland when the Dallas Cowboys took him. And I'm sure he wanted to do them proud, probably prouder than he was able to do them so far in Dallas. And I thought back to all those Cowboys I knew through the 80s. All those Larry Betheas and Rod Hills and Howard Richards. Good man was Howard Richards. He just wasn't, he's an offensive tackle, but just wasn't big enough and physical enough. But he went on to do great things for the University of Missouri as an announcer and just an ambassador for the school. High football IQ. But so many of these, they just struggled and struggled and struggled. And I heard so many stories about depression, and I thought, well, did this, it probably didn't help his mindset to be struggling as a Dallas Cowboy. Was he overdrafted? Maybe a round. Would he have been better as a third rounder where there'd been no expectation, little extra third, fourth rounder maybe? And then I wondered finally about, in the end, November 4th, Jerry Jones traded for Quinnen Williams. I loved it. I said that was the best single player acquired over the trade deadline. Quinnen Williams to my Dallas Cowboys. And on November 6th, I heard that Marshawn Kneeland was gone. And last night I thought, gee, did that make him even less happy? That they'd had to go out and acquire another great defensive lineman to solve their problems? I don't know, maybe. Did he live on the internet? Were people hard on him in the internet? Were they demanding more of him on the internet? Were they ridiculing him on the internet? Did he take it to heart? It happens so many times with so many of the players his age, both men and women. In the end, on Monday night, it was a beautiful night, beautiful tribute to this young man. And all I can say is, I feel like I know him so much better now than I did